I was there. I saw. I felt. The morning sun entered the kitchen window, drawing light patterns on the table where we were. The rays danced softly, creating a silent and almost sacred spectacle, while my mother, with her serene smile, moved the coffee. It was a morning like so many others, but now, in retrospect, it seems to have been full of omens that time went unnoticed. The sweet and familiar smell of coffee filled the air, mingling with the scent of the toast she had just prepared. I observed every movement of yours, as I always did, with the attention of a child who is unaware of the complexity of adulthood. Her voice had a reassuring melody as she asked me about my plans for the day, the duties of the school I should complete, and the drawing I was looking forward to ending. There was something comforting on those mornings, a sense of security that only the deepest family ties can provide. She wore the blue dress she liked so much, with small embroidered flowers that seemed to come to life in the sunlight. I remember how the fabric moved gently with the wind that came from the open window, a subtle dance that accompanied our routine and carefree gestures. Sometimes she stopped to look out the window, her eyes lost on the horizon for a moment. I didn't understand what she saw, but now, I think maybe there was something she did, something I was unable to capture in childhood innocence. It was in this scenario of tranquility that she mentioned needing to get something at the gate, a simple phrase, dictated as naturally as it was spoken of time or the shopping list. I didn't think much about it. Why would you think? She had gone out so many times before, always returning with a smile and some news to tell. But this time it was different. She left, and the sound of the door closing behind her resonated in a way that only later would I recognize as an echo of absence. I waited. I expected the family's family click to repeat, that it would return with its warm presence. But time has passed, and the kitchen began to look colder, the steam of the coffee dissipating in the air as the silence settled, heavy and uncomfortable. I searched. I called. I waited. 10 minutes have become an eternity, and in the minds of a 9-year-old boy, eternity gains forms that go beyond logical understanding. Every second was a drop of anxiety that added to the ocean of uncertainties that was beginning to form within me. I didn't know that quiet morning, with its soft sun and the scent of coffee, it would be the last one I would remember like this. I did not know that when crossing the doorway, my mother would take with her the simplicity of childhood, leaving me only with memories impregnated with missing and questions without answers. I was there. I saw. I felt. Sunday started with a ritual that, for me, was as certain as sunrise. The kitchen, bathed in the golden light of a lazy morning, was the heart of our home. Mom always woke up before me, and I liked to wake up with the soft sound of her steps around the house. It was like a silent melody that announced the beginning of another safe and happy day. The routine was always the same, but never monotonous. She was preparing coffee with almost ceremonial care, as if each movement was part of a dancing 1,000 times. I sat at the table, feeling the warmth of the cinnamon milk between the small hands, the sweet aroma rising in spirals that seemed to mix with the robust smell of the coffee she liked to drink. The kitchen had an aura of simplicity and harmony, a refuge where time seemed to slow down just to observe us. As we had our breakfast, our conversations filled the space between us with an intimacy that only the words said between mother and son can have. She asked me about the school, about my friends, and always made a point of knowing how my dolls were, as if they were real people with their own stories to tell. I talked about what I would learn at school on Monday, about the joke that my friend and I had invented, and the drawing I promised to end. Mom mentioned the cake I intended to make later, a brigadeiro topping chocolate cake that was my favorite. "This afternoon we will do together," she said, and I imagined the kitchen again full of sweet aromas, the heat of the oven, the flour spread across the table. Every promise of cake seemed to be a small pact of love and joy, a promise that everything would remain well in our little world. Nothing that morning seemed out of the normal. It was one of those days when time moves with a pleasant slowness, allowing each moment to be tasteful to its fullest. I watched Mom as she spoke, her eyes shining with a quiet happiness, the kind of happiness that comes from simple and honest things. She smiled easily, and that smile was like a spell that pushed any shadow of worry or fear away. I couldn't imagine that such a familiar routine, so full of security and love, was about to break irreparably. That morning, I didn't know that the world, with its merciless ability to change, was about to surprise us. The kitchen, so full of light and heat, would be the last normal bastion I would know for a long time. I didn't know I was about to lose not only my mother, but also a part of the childhood that could never be recovered. The sound of the radio in the background, playing a soft song, the tickery of the clock on the wall, everything was part of a symphony of tranquility that I would want to keep forever. But life is made of moments that pass, and that morning, while Mom mentioned needing to look for something at the gate, I did not realize that this would be the last act of a piece I knew by heart. I didn't know, and maybe, being a child, it was better that way, not knowing that behind the calm, fate whispered silent changes that I was not yet prepared to face. I was there. I saw. I felt. The morning continued with its usual serenity, and I, still absorbed in my childhood, did not present the approaching change. The sound of running water, while my mother washed the dishes, was a family melody, a soft murmur that filled the environment with the feeling of normality. I drew distractedly, plunged into my own world, when his voice cut the air with a simplicity that did not denounce the impact he would have. "I'll just see who's at the gate. I'll be back." These words were spoken in a casual tone, as if it just went to get the newspaper or greet a neighbor. She took the coat she always wore to leave, an old friend who accompanied her on colder mornings. He smiled at me with that smile that promised quick and safe returns. The sound of the latch echoed around the house, a note that was quickly lost in the silence that followed it. I waited. 5 minutes. Deck. 15. The time, which once had almost imperceptible softness, now seemed suspended, every second dragging on a weight that did not match the sunny morning. I would look at the door, waiting for her to open at any moment, bringing back the warmth of her presence, but the door remained closed, and anxiety began to infiltrate me like a growing shadow. I got up from the chair, hesitant, and walked to the gate. With each step, my heart was beating faster, a tamarilla that resonated in my ears. The gate was closed on the outside. I tried to open it, but did not move. The street before me was silent, an immovable scene that seemed attached to some kind of enchantment. I looked around, waiting to see Mom coming back, but I saw only the empty sidewalk and the trees that swayed gently in the wind. That silence was different from the comforting morning silence of the morning. It was an oppressive silence, loaded with uncertainty and unanswered questions. I called it for her, my voice echoing in quiet, but there was no answer. I searched. I called. I waited. The world seemed to have stopped, and time, before my ally, now became a cruel enemy, expanding the feeling of emptiness that was beginning to settle in. I returned into the house, the kitchen still impregnated with the scent of the coffee that had cooled. I touched her cup, still on the table, as if it could bring it back. The heat was gone, leaving only a remnant of warmth that would soon dissipate. The kitchen, once pulsating life, now seemed a strange place, a reminder of something I could no longer achieve. I sat again, the restlessness growing like a tide that cannot be contained. I didn't know what to do, a 9-year-old lost in a sea of doubt. Time continued to pass, every minute an eternity that I didn't understand. The radio still played in the background, a song that made no more sense. At that moment, reality began to distort itself, the comfort of my house becoming a scenario of uncertainty. I was looking out the window, hoping to see her, but all I saw was the same silent street, the same unchanging scenery. I looked for refuge in recent memories, seeking the safety that the mornings with it always provided. But now, these memories were like ghosts, present but intangible, leaving me only with the longing that began to fill the empty space around me. Time passed, and with him, the certainty I had that everything was well started to fade. That sunny morning, which had begun like so many others, had become an unfathomable puzzle. I did not know that when crossing the gate, my mother had crossed to a world I could not follow, a world that would leave me indelible marks and questions that would echo all of my life. I was there. I saw. I felt. When I returned into the house, the air seemed denser, every longer shadow, as if the world was trying to swallow me. The feeling of being alone, really alone, was starting to enter my bones, bringing with it a cold that did not belong to that sunny morning. Silence was interrupted only by the clock ticker, a sound that suddenly became a cruel reminder of the time that passed unanswered. I ran to the landline, an old but reliable device that had the color of ivory worn out of time and hands that so often dial familiar numbers. My trembling fingers found my aunt's number, one of the few adult figures I knew I could call that suddenly. I waited, every touch of the phone a collision of hope and fear, but the line remained changed, as if the whole world was in a state of suspension, a dream I couldn't wake up. I hung up, and with an urgency that I was unaware, I tried my mother's cell phone. I squeezed the numbers tightly, as if the pressure could do magic and bring his voice back. The initial touch sounded like a relief, a rescue rope thrown into a stormy sea. But soon, the mailbox interrupted this fragile hope, its automatic message a merciless reminder that there was no one on the other side. The room clock marked 9:42. The pointers seemed to mock my impotence, each movement a reminder that time was still without it. I sat on the couch, the cup of still hot coffee in my hands, like a talisman that could ward off the unknown. The heat in the porcelain was comforting but passing, very similar to the sense of security that until then I had always taken as guaranteed. There, hugging my cup, I tried to believe that she would come back at any moment. I stared at the door, hoping the doorknob spinning, that his figure would appear in the jail, bringing with him the smile that always illuminated the environment. I imagined his face opening in surprise to see me there, worried for no reason, and his soft laugh to realize my anxiety. But the reality was an empty room, and a phone that remained silent. A child's mind is a place of mysteries and fragility, where logic often gives in to the power of emotion. That morning, each thought seemed a shadow of doubt. Every scenario I imagined was a fight against the truth I didn't want to accept. I was just a boy, desperately trying to cling to a lint of normality in a world that suddenly seemed to have lost its axis. The sun, which once entered generously through the window, now seemed cold and distant. The light that bathed the room no longer brought comfort, but a painful exhibition of the absence. In silence, I was able to hear my own heart, each beat an echo of uncertainty that was nestled in my chest. It seemed impossible that one day, began with such simplicity, could have become such a painful puzzle. For a moment, I wanted everything to be a nightmare, something I could wake up with a sudden movement. But there was no awakening, just the raw reality that I was alone, surrounded by shadows and memories that could not fill the void she had left. I looked for comfort in the little things around me, the smell of coffee, the distant sound of the radio, the soft fabric of the couch, but everything seemed insufficient. The morning advanced, and with her, the certainty that something was really wrong if it deepened. The cup in my hands was beginning to cool, a reminder of the time that exhausted without bringing answers. The world, once so familiar and safe, was now a place full of uncertainty and unanswered questions. I was there. I saw. I felt. And at that moment, I realized that the search for my mother would not only be a matter of time, but a journey that would change everything I knew. I hugged the cup harder, as if your presence could anchor my hope in something tangible. The phone beside me was a monument of unassailed possibilities, a symbol of the distance that suddenly interposed between me and the world I knew. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I needed to find a way to deal with what was coming. The morning was still clear, but inside me, a storm formed, increasingly strong, increasingly impossible to ignore. I was there. I saw. I felt. The world seemed to have become a puzzle with missing pieces, and I, a 9-year-old child, desperately tried to find the answers where nothing made sense. The house was immersed in a heavy silence, the kind of silence that amplifies every small sound and turns minutes into eternities. I decided I needed to do something, anything, that could fill the growing void inside me. I knocked on the door of Donna Helen, our front neighbor. She was a friendly lady, with cab-white links like snow and eyes that always seemed to know more than they said. When she opened the door, her gaze found mine, with a mixture of curiosity and worry. I explained with a trembling voice that my mother had left and had not yet returned. Donna Helen's expression changed to something more serious, and she invited me to enter. The smell of lavender filled her house, an aroma that always made me feel like in a secret garden. She offered me tea, but I refused, unable to think of anything beyond my mother's whereabouts. I sat at her kitchen table, my feet swinging in the air as she spoke with a calm that tried to reassure me. His voice was low and soft, like a whisper in the storm of thoughts that shake my mind. Donna Helen said she saw my mother open the gate and talk to a tall man with a cap. He was dressed simply, almost mixing with the daily scenery of the street. There was something in the way she described the man who made me feel a shiver on her spine. as if a greater mystery was behind her presence. She said he delivered something small, wrapped in paper, and the two walked together to the corner. After that, she didn't see her anymore. These words, though simple, were like stones thrown into an already busy lake of uncertainties. Who was that man? What was in that package? I had no answers, just a new layer of questions that accumulated about those that already existed. The children's mind has a peculiar ability to create stories and scenarios, and immediately I saw myself wondering the most diverse possibilities, each more disconcerting than the other. In my chest, a mixture of fear and hope was struggling, a battle between believing that it was all a misunderstanding and fear that something really bad had happened. I thanked Donna Helen for her help, her words echoing in my head as I came home. The way back seemed longer, every step an effort to maintain composure in the face of new information. Upon entering, the house seemed even more empty, as if the newly published knowledge had taken any safety remnants I still had. The day was beginning to lean into the afternoon, and with it, the sense of urgency grew, an urgency that I didn't know how to quench. I looked in Donna Helen's eyes, some clue, some indication that everything would look good, but all I found was a mirror of my own uncertainty. The sun, which once bathed the room with its golden light, now projected long and unsettling shadows, turning the familiarity of my home into an unknown terrain. I was there. I saw. I felt. And at that moment, I realized that the search for my mother was also a search for answers within myself, a journey to understand what meant losing someone so essential, even temporarily. I needed a plan, some way of acting that could bring some meaning to the chaos that was formed around me. Sitting on the couch, with my mind, I wondered what my mother would do in a situation like this. She had always been the anchor, the silent force that kept everything in order. And now, without it, I needed to find a way to keep my little boat into the sea of uncertainty that had become my reality. I decided I would look for her in the neighborhood. Maybe someone knew more. Maybe there was a clue I hadn't considered yet. With this decision came a renewed determination, a heat that replaced the cold of fear, even for a brief moment. I was there, a child in a world of adults, but determined not to let hope go out. I was there. I saw. I felt. And despite everything, I knew I needed to keep looking. I needed to believe that somewhere the answers were waiting to be found. I was there. I saw. I felt. The third day dawned with a pale light that seemed almost hesitant, as if the sun was also aware that something was out of place. The house, which was once a security sanctuary, now seemed to be part of a faded painting, where bright colors had given way to shades of gray and uncertainty. Each morning it was a battle between the hope that my mother would return and the growing fear that something irrevocable had happened. That morning, the sound of the postman's doorbell brought me back to reality with a sudden urgency. I ran to the door, the heart jumping into my chest with a mixture of anxiety and expectation. The postman, a middle-aged man who always had a smile of good morning, handed me a brown envelope. He did not seem to know the importance of what was in his hands, or the impact he would have on my fragile existence. The envelope did not bring sender, just my name and addressed address in a hasty manner. There was something to be sinister in the simplicity of that package, a silent promise that contained more than it appeared. With trembling hands, I tore the paper, the sound echoing in the stillness of the house like a thunder in a clean day. Inside, I found a single photo. It was an image of me and my mother, captured without her knowing, on the morning of her disappearance. The scene was almost painted in tones of nostalgia, the sun spilling its light through the kitchen window, the steam of the coffee floating in the air, and we both smiling, oblivious to what was to come. My heart squeezed to see her smile, so genuine, so full of life. On the back of the photo, a handwritten message, "Protect what was." The words were like a riddle, each letter carrying a weight that I couldn't define. For a moment, I was paralyzed, trying to decipher the hidden meaning in that message. Who would have sent that, and why? Those words, so few and at the same time so overwhelming, caused a storm inside me. Protect what was? What did that mean? My childish mind wandered through scenarios that went from mystery films to fairy tales, trying to find some logic in that chaos. The absence of explanations, of concrete clues, only served to increase my anguish. I was alone in the room, that photograph between my fingers, the silence around me becoming increasingly oppressive. My eyes settled again in the image, seeking some detail that could offer an answer. But the photo was just a frozen moment in time, unable to tell me more than I already knew. I decided I needed to show the picture to Donna Helen. Maybe her most experienced eyes could see something that mine didn't see. I crossed the street, the envelope safe in my hands like a relic. With each step, hope and despair intertwined, forming a rope that squeezed my chest. Donna Helen opened the door with her usual kindness, but her eyes reflected the concern to see my expression. No words. I handed her the envelope and waited, my breath almost suspended as she examined the photo and the message. She frowned, her eyes walking through the words, as if trying to unravel a secret buried in the simplicity of the message. "Protect what was," she read aloud, her voice a whisper that seemed to amplify the mystery. We were silent, two involuntary detectives in the face of a puzzle that we could not resolve. Donna Helen suggested that we may be looking for the police, show them the picture, and see if they could help. There was a determination in his voice that gave me a new spark of hope. I knew that together, we might find more than alone. Back at my house, we called the detective who was taking care of the case, a man of a few words, but to look at him. He arrived in a short time, his presence filling the room with a silent authority. He watched the photo and message, his hands holding the paper carefully. "What was?" he murmured more to himself than to us. His eyes found mine, and at that moment, I saw a flash of understanding. He revealed nothing, but promised to investigate, said we were going to find answers, and that I needed to be strong. After he left, I stared out the window, the envelope now empty in my hands. The street outside followed with its indifferent routine, people coming and going, oblivious to the whirlwind inside me. I was there. I saw. I felt. And at that moment, I realized that protecting what was left was more than just a request. It was a mission, proof that despite the absence, love and memories could still guide me in the middle of darkness. As the sun slowly descended on the horizon, bringing with it the cloak of the night, I promised myself that I would not give up. My mother was somewhere, and I needed to find her. I needed to understand what those words meant, what the future reserved for both of us. I was there. I saw. I felt. And above all, I knew that as long as there was hope, there would also be a way to follow. I was there. I saw. I felt. The sound of the police sirens blended with the buzz of the neighbors, who clustered in small groups, whispering theories and spreading rumors. The detective, a severe man and perscouring look, moved between them with the severity of those who carry the weight of a complicated mystery. I watched everything from a corner, the sense of impotence by mingling with fear as I tried to process the magnitude of what happened around me. The search began almost immediately after my mother was given as missing, with police sowing the surroundings, interrogating anyone who could have seen or heard something. The questions were always the same. Did anyone see my mother, or the man in a cap? Has anyone heard something unusual that morning? But the answers were vague, fragments of a puzzle that looked like possible to solve. I spent the next morning at the police station, a place that seemed as far from my world as an unknown planet. Detectives showed me the images captured by security cameras installed on the nearby streets. I napped myself in an uncomfortable chair. My heart fired while watching the video. There she was, my mother, walking beside the cap. There was something in his posture that disturbed me. She kept her head slightly lowered, and her eyes, when they looked back, were full of a concern I had never seen before. The images were great, almost unreal, as if time had worn them. The detective stopped the video just as my mother looked back, her face captured in a moment of uncertainty. "She seemed worried," detective commented, more to herself than to me. I nodded, the knot in my throat growing as it absorbed what I saw. The investigation kept bumping into dead-end alleys. The man in a cap was a ghostly, faceless, unnamed presence, just a shadow that hovered over the case. None of the neighbors recognized him, and the cameras captured nothing but that brief ride to the corner. It was as if he had evaporated in the air, taking my mother with him. The following days were a dance between hope and despair. Police were still investigating, but the clues were scarce, and the time relentless. Each passing day without answers was an eternity, proof of the fragility of hope. I spent hours at the police station, watching the detective and his team work, their dark expressions reflecting the severity of the situation. At home, my mother's absence was a silent scream. Every corner of the house seemed impregnated with his presence, and at the same time, his absence. I wandered through the rooms, touching the object she used to use, as if contact could conjure her return. The blue dress she wore that day was still hung in the closet, a painful memory of what had been and what was now missing. Donna Helen was a constant presence, her kindness and patience an anchor in the midst of the storm. She accompanied me to the police station, offered me tea when I couldn't sleep, and told me stories of her youth, stories that distracted me, even soon, the incessant pain of the wait. She also talked to the police, trying to gather pieces of the puzzle that we were all desperate to solve. As the days became weeks, the investigation seemed to lose breath. Detective, which had initially promised quick answers, now spoke in terms of doubts and possibilities. Uncertainty became a constant companion, an unwanted visitor in our home. I was there. I saw. I felt. And in that silence, between the shadows of what had been and what could be, I began to understand that the search for my mother was also a search for myself, for a sense in the chaos. I couldn't give up, not as long as there was a chance to find her. The enigmatic photography and the message, "Protect what was," became my mantra, my guide on sleepless nights and endless days. I knew that somehow it had a purpose, a meaning that I couldn't understand yet. In that police station, in the midst of maps and archives, between tired faces and looks that avoided direct contact, I promised myself that I would continue to look, that would not let hope go out. My mother was out there somewhere, and I needed to believe that despite all the obstacles I would find her. I was there. I saw. I felt. And in that determination, I found the thread of hope I needed to continue. I was there. I saw. I felt. Time had passed strangely, as if every day it was a mosaic of lost and recovered moments. 8 years had gone out since that morning, but my mother's absence was still a constant presence in my life. It was like a shadow that extended in all aspects of my being, an absence that I had learned to carry, but never fully accepted it. That day, the house was immersed in the stillness of an ordinary afternoon. I had decided to devote some time to get the attic, a space that always remembered my childhood, full of sleeping memories and unfinished stories. The sun was filtered through the dusty windows, throwing gold rays on the old furniture and stacked boxes. Each object seemed to tell a part of the story of our family, a narrative that I was still trying to understand. It was as I searched some old book boxes that I found the envelope. It was hidden among the yellow pages of one of my mother's favorite novels, the one she always said she changed her life. As I caught it, I felt a shiver through my spine, a feeling instinctiva that this was a decisive moment. The envelope was slightly wrinkled, as if he had been handled many times, but still kept an air of untouched mystery. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope, and the smell of ancient paper mixed with something more, perhaps the smooth perfume it used, involved the air. The lyrics were unmistakable, a handwriting that I knew as well as the palm of my hand. If one day I don't come back, don't try to follow me. I did it for you. The words danced before my eyes, each carrying a weight and meaning that were at the same time clear and mysterious. The ink was blurred, as if tears had fallen on the paper, dissolving part of the message, but not its impact. It was as if my mother was there, beside me, whispering those words with an urgency that crossed time. I sat on the floor, the envelope in one hand, the letter in the other, trying to process what I had just read. Those words, so few and at the same time so overwhelming, have opened a door to an abyss of feelings that I had kept under control for years. There was a deep sadness, an anguish that seemed to echo the same sense of loss I had felt in those early days after its disappearance. But there was also something more, a sudden understanding, a new perspective on the choices she had made. I had always wondered why my mother had disappeared, why she had left everything behind without explanation. Many times I wondered if there was something I could have done, some way to have it kept it by my side. But now, with the letter in hand, I realized that its decision was not impulsive or selfish. It was a sacrifice, a choice made with love, for reasons that I may never fully understand. 8 years had passed, and with them, I had grown, had become a woman, but always with a part of me anchored that day. Now, with this new puzzle piece, I realized that my mother had always been present, guiding me from afar, protecting myself from dangers that I couldn't see. His reasons were a mystery, but the intention behind them was not. The letter was a will of love and courage, a reminder that even in the absence she had found a way of being with me. Those words were not just a goodbye. They were also a promise that there was more than I could see, more than I could understand. They gave me the strength to move on, to continue seeking answers, but also to accept that some questions may never have a clear explanation. I was there. I saw. I felt. And at that moment, I knew that my mother had left a legacy of love and courage that I would carry with me, no matter what the future brought. The letter was in my hands, but its true place was in my heart, a constant reminder that love transcends time and distance. With a deep sigh, I closed my eyes and thanked for the gift of understanding, for the chance to finally find some peace in the midst of the storm that was his absence. I didn't know where she was, not even if she would see her again, but she knew she would always be with me. Memories, in the lessons, and now, in the words she had left me. I was there. I saw. I felt. And at that moment, I knew that as long as there was love, I would never be really alone. The script is complete. I was there. I saw. I felt. Today, the morning breeze carried with it the unmistakable aroma of coffee. This smell, so common and daily, always brought me back to that morning, that cuisine flooded with light, and my mother's warm smile. However, now, he also brings with him an ocean of emotions that I have long learned to navigate. I am still surprised by the power that a simple memory can have, by its ability to transport me to that moment, when everything was safe and right, before the world became a web of uncertainty. I was just a child, just 9 years old, but life taught me early that some goodbyes come without warning, like thunder in a clear sky. Time did not delete these lessons, only solidified them, turning them into silent companions over the years. That Sunday was the milestone of an irreversible change, a turning point that shaped not only my childhood, but also the person I became. I can still feel the texture of the table towel under my fingers, the warmth of the cinnamon milk wrapping my small hands, and my mother's soft look as I wondered about the banal details of an ordinary day. What happened between the gate and the corner remains a mystery that pursues me, a puzzle that inhabits the periphery of my mind, always present, even when I am not consciously thinking about him. It is like an unfinished melody that resonates in the background, an unanswered question that echoes over the years. For a long time, I tried to fill in the gaps, the pieces of a puzzle that has never been complete. Each attempt was like a journey through a maze of memories and assumptions, where each path seemed to lead to more questions. And there was the package, that little paper package that my mother received from the man by Cap. What did you contain? Why was it so important? These questions became ghosts that accompanied me on sleepless nights when the house was silent and the world seemed asleep. Sometimes I imagined that within that package there was a key, not only literal but also figurative, capable of opening doors for long sought-after answers. Other times, I thought that perhaps it was just a common object, without greater meaning, but somehow had triggered a series of events that changed everything. Life followed its course. And I, forced to grow faster than I expected, learned to live with uncertainties. I learned to find strength in memories, to seek comfort in the little things my mother taught me to value. She always said that life is made of moments, and these moments, however ephemeral, have the power to shape us. Today, I better understand these words, because I saw how each souvenir fragment built the person I am. The search for answers never ceased completely. For years, I revisited that Sunday in my mind, trying to find something I could have passed. I even considered that the answer was in such a small detail that my memory had relegated him to oblivion. But the truth is that as much as he investigated, as much as he wished to unravel the mystery, he remained stubbornly out of reach, like a horizon that never approaches, no matter how much he walks toward him. But over time, I began to realize that perhaps the real question was not the content of the package, or even what happened between the gate and the corner. Perhaps what really mattered was what I learned along the way, about love, loss, and human resilience. The mystery itself has become part of me, a constant reminder that life is full of uncertainties, and that sometimes we must find peace not in the answers, but in the acceptance that some questions may never be answered. Today, when smelling coffee, I allow myself a moment of memory and gratitude. I think of my mother and the legacy she left, not just in the words of an old letter, but in every gesture, in every lesson that taught me about unconditional courage and love. I think of the journey I traveled, the people I found along the way, and in the strength I discovered within myself. The endless question is still there, but it no longer torments me as before. Now it is just a part of history, one of the many facets of a life lived with fullness and purpose. I was there. I saw. I felt. And despite the doubts that still get in the air, I know that my mother's love has guided me and will continue to guide, regardless of the answers I can find, or those that remain hidden.